Hello, everyone. Thanks for your patience, and we were just getting set up in the green room back here. Welcome to From ROI to ROE, the true value of return on engagement. This is part 2. We had part 1 in the fall. This is show 4 of a 4-part mini-series where I've sort of rallied together four engagement experts to share their insights and their wisdom with you about why coaches, consultants, and solopreneurs need to be more focused on building relationships than on building their lists. Not to say that you don't need a list, because you absolutely do need a list, but maybe we could be more focused on having some authentic conversations as we build our business and do our work in the world. I'm your host, Lisa Ingalls. I'm an evolutionary entrepreneur. I'm a consultant, a mentor, and I work with people just like you who are waking up and changing the world through my programs and services. This series is sponsored by Hangout Strategies for Visionary Leaders. It's a mentorship program that teaches changemakers how to cultivate, connect, and communicate their message to a global audience and make a meaningful impact across the planet through the technology of Hangouts. You can learn more about that by going to bit.ly/Hangout Hero, which is right below my video here. And today, my guest for this grand finale show is David Amerland. He's going to be talking with us today about the role that Google Hangouts can play in building authentic engagement for your brand and your business, and how Hangouts might be shaping the future of online marketing. I'm going to be bringing David on in just a moment, but first I want to recap what's happened in the previous 3 shows of this series, just to catch you up in case you haven't seen all 3 of them. So we kicked off this series with Andy Lyons and talked about authentic engagement. We busted the 3 myths, or 3 of the myths, about authentic engagement. In show 2, Stepan Havnonian joined us for a discussion about why coaches, consultants, and solopreneurs should be using Google Plus as part of their engagement strategy, and also how to repurpose your engagement. Can you really do that? Yeah, you can. And then our 3rd show was with Dustin Stout, who talked about how to build authentic engagement across multiple platforms, and also the role that honesty plays in building online relationships. So if you missed any of those shows, you can go ahead and catch those replays. The links are in the description area of this Hangout. So I'm super thrilled that David Amerland agreed to be a part of this mini-series, to be a guest in this mini-series. I've been following David since I've been on Google Plus, because I noticed right when I got on, he was on a lot of the Hangouts that were out there, so I was just watching the Hangouts. And one of the things that struck me about David right away is his ability to express concepts and ideas in a way that really broadened my perspective and my understanding. It gave me a better understanding, like depth and breadth of understanding of what I call digital potential. I mean, I understand everything that he says, but I couldn't ever explain how he explains it. He's brilliant. If you've ever heard him talk, you know what I'm talking about. So David is a semantic search and social media strategist. He has a brilliant mind for how companies can harness digital potential to serve their customers and their prospective customers. He's the author of a whole bunch of books, including Google Plus Hangouts for Business, which is an excellent book. We'll be talking a lot about some of the concepts that are in that book today in this Hangout. And when he's not writing, he's traveling to give speeches and presentations all over the world to big corporations and big executives. So welcome to the show, David. Great, glad to have you here.
Thank you, and I'm thrilled to be here. I've been following this series since the beginning, and I think you've actually managed to bring together a lot of concepts in a fairly actionable way and make it a lot more accessible, which I think is really key to achieving a lot of the things we want to achieve in this environment.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And I feel like, again, when I said that in the intro about you have this way you just have an understanding of digital potential, not just from the techie side of it, but the human side of it, the psychology of digital potential, and the way that you're able to merge your understanding, or your expertise of all the techie piece plus the human psychology piece of it is beyond me. I could never. How you write, and it just makes it all make sense. I'm like, damn, that just makes total sense how he's put it all together. No wonder. So
I'm very glad. I'm glad it resonates. A lot of it comes from actually looking at the data and the things we do. I mean, we are in many ways fortunate now that we have the tools to actually see how the data impacts. And the moment we do see something, we have a key to understanding why, because nothing happens without a reason. And in the past, we used to have a perception, we used to have a gut feeling, and then we used to put it into action, and it maybe worked, maybe it didn't work. And a lot of the practicalities used to be lost in the execution because we focused too much on the tools we had.
Yeah.
We used to focus on building the email list, for instance, because from a purely logical point of view, it makes perfect sense. Same thing with a community. If you're a company and you say, what I need is a community. Why? Because that community will be my customers. And it's like shooting fish in a barrel, right? So again, it makes a lot of sense. But we know that when we apply those things and we actually measure the metrics, something is actually lost in translation from the concept to the practice. And in the 21st century, what we're actually finding is that a lot of the things which work are the things which have always worked, but we didn't know why. And the things which don't work, that's the things which never worked, but we couldn't see why.
Right.
So everything's beginning to sort of make more sense now.
Yeah, because we have that data behind it. That makes sense. So you say that communication without a specific focus is just noise. And so I've seen this huge shift happening in the online marketing space. I think there's an emerging trend that's happening. What used to work no longer works. You talk about that in your book. In terms of marketing, what used to work is no longer going to work. And that the way that brands used to communicate in terms of traditional marketing, which was very impersonal, just maybe a fancy logo and a tagline. If you look at this trend in online marketing, it's, to me, I see it as what it used to be doing was just taking these direct marketing tactics that were used offline before we came online, put them into copy, right? And that resulted in the things that you're talking about, like email marketing. In my industry, like email marketing, automated webinars, teleseminars or telesummits. And to me, all of this type of marketing is just noise, not because necessarily it doesn't have a focus, but because it isn't very connected. It's lacking that personal connection. So I thought maybe we could open this discussion today with just what you see as the barriers to relearning. You talk about this in the book. We need to relearn how to connect, how to do something that used to come so naturally to us. What do you see as some of the barriers that businesses face?
That's an excellent question to begin with. And it's the same whether you're a small business or a large global multinational, you face the exact same challenge. How do you scale your marketing efforts in a way that actually makes sense, so that what it costs you to do something is a lot less than what it brings you back in terms of sales and reach and impact? And if it doesn't make sense at that kind of understanding, then it's not really going to work. So we know that the only thing that really works in terms of connecting with somebody is that personal connection. They need to understand who you are. They need to understand you as a person or an entity if you're a business. They need to understand your values, where you stand in terms of all sorts of things which are beyond the business arena, and then that has an impact on the connection which leads to business further on down the line. So how do you manage that? Well, essentially, the only way you can make this scale is by being, and this sounds like a cliche, be yourself. And the moment you say that, you say, well, am I going to overshare? Here's my breakfast. And you say, whoa, this is not exactly what we want. But what we do want is a sense that you're human, that you have human concerns, as opposed to making a sale. And that's the intrinsic difference. If all I'm concerned about is to make a sale, the only message that I'm actually succeeding in sending is that I see you as a unit, as a consumer. The only interest that I have is in what's inside your wallet. And that's all. That's the entire framework of our connection. It's very cold, it's very calculated, and it's almost manipulative in the way that I will try to hit the emotional triggers, which I think will lead to the eventual outcome. If I see you as a person, then that changes the entire conversation. The way I'm going to approach it, how I'm going to frame it, why I might suggest you could be interested in what I'm doing. And that leads to a connection which allows us to create a better assessment. And all that requires one thing, really. It requires attention. We live in a very crowded world. There are a lot of things which actually demand our attention constantly, and we only have 24 hours in a day, and this isn't going to change. So as technology progresses, as things get better, as the world gets more complicated in that fashion, that 24-hour segment in the day is going to remain constant, which means that attention then becomes the most valuable commodity that we actually have. Those who command attention eventually command business, and it's as simple as that. The only way you can command attention is not by shouting louder, because that only creates a lot more noise, and eventually noise gets drowned out by more noise, and so on and so on. But you actually create a point of relevance, which means that in any kind of communication that you have with anybody, it has to be relevant to what they need, to what they feel, to what they care about. And that leads to that connection. And when you have somebody's attention, well, that attention has real value, because even if they're not your direct customer, they can lead to others finding you, which then become your customers. And that brings on the entire sort of market share that you actually need.
Yeah, well, you just like said so much in what you just said. So that brings me to when you say that we need to command attention, like that's the ultimate, and that you command attention by creating relevance. So then my question is, well, how do we create relevance? And I think of how you talk about empathy. Like empathy is a way of connecting so that you're not looking at the other people as units, as you're talking about, but as human beings. To create relevance is relatability, and then there's that empathy piece. Can you talk a bit about that role that empathy plays in relevance and commanding attention?
Yes, absolutely. And this is the key, really. And this is where small businesses always have an advantage over a large corporation, because empathy comes from that, from the ability to see the other person you're talking to as another person, understand their framework, and actually talk to them in a language that allows them to understand that you're also a person, as opposed to a brand or a business or somebody trying to make a sale. And now you're asking the difficult question, how do we actually establish a sense of empathy? Well, if we go offline and we go into a pub setting, and we're a group of people, perhaps just recently met, so we don't know each other very well. Somebody talks about sports and somebody talks about cars. Well, that's not a place for you to whip out your business card and pass it around to everybody and saying, oh, by the way, if you want to buy, XYZ, here's my card. Because although that is within the logic of the connection, very, very valid, you're actually connecting, bringing out information, establishing who you are, it's not human at all. You haven't really listened to what they're talking about. You haven't tried to understand how they feel about things. You haven't really tried to understand who they are. So we know that in that offline setting, you wouldn't behave like that. You would actually instinctively listen to them, try to establish who they are, look at the way they dress, their body language, the way they talk, and try and find a connection where you bring in your own knowledge and skill set to actually allow them to see you as a person. So if you know about sports, you would talk about sports if the opportunity arises. If you don't know about sports, and you don't know anything about the conversation, you could even say that you really know nothing about sports because, your parents weren't that way inclined. And that's a humanizing experience. Suddenly makes you very vulnerable. And it allows them to understand why you're keeping silent instead of you being aloof, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
The things which we do instinctively offline, because we're basically social animals, don't always translate very easily online, simply because we don't do enough thinking. We tend to be blinded by the fact that the mode of person, identity, communication, aim, intent translates into, hey, here's my business card and this is what I'm selling, and if anybody wants to buy, this is where to find me. So we tend to be lost in the concept as opposed to the actual implementation of it, which is very human. And that's where that empathy comes in. That's where you listen to your audience, you understand who they really are. This is new for us. In the past, we didn't have that kind of audience. We had marketing personas. We had a sort of idealized form of an age group and a demographic and some kind of interests, and we marketed at them. We marketed to them in terms of, we thought, this is the broad picture of what they do and who they are. And now we actually talk to real people. They have real concerns. They come back at us really quickly. If we sound false, if we sound aloof, if we sound like we have no real idea of who they are, but we pretend they do, they're very quick to call us up. And suddenly everything becomes very visible because that connection, that interaction, other people see it and they make their own judgments. They draw their own inferences. And that's where you get the scaling. That's where you can have a very successful conversation suddenly traveling across the web, being seen by many people, and bringing you converts who wouldn't necessarily have come to you in the first place. So it's that kind of awareness, and it doesn't scale very well in a large corporation simply because there is not yet the sense of accountability and humanization within its walls. Most companies I talk to struggle to actually create that. And to their credit, they're actually taking many, many steps to try to get to that kind of atmosphere.
Well, and then that's what makes Hangouts a disruptive technology for the small business owners or the solopreneurs, because they can do something right off the bat that the big corporations are trying to backpedal to relearn how to do, because many of them have built their business models based on something that was around before all of this technology, this digital potential allowed us to have these types of real connections. I mean,
yes. It's a question of, you're making a very important point here, and really it's a question of scale. For all of 20th century, we went from the cottage industry concept, which allowed for a very personal connection, a very narrow environment within very limited kind of frameworks, to the global concept, where a company could actually scale in terms of production, bring down costs, and reach a market at a very large one-to-many kind of model. And within all of that, we need the same thing. Whether you have a cottage industry setting or you have a global setting, you need trust. And the way we created trust in the 20th century world was through sheer size and also the sort of faceless kind of approach, because that required a certain cost and expertise to actually create. So if you were dealing, for instance, with a company with a multi-skyscraper presence in many different cities, with the mall presence in different expensive malls, the understanding was that they were so slick and big, and they invested so much in that presence that it was unlikely for them to allow or to gain from one or two bad experiences. They couldn't really cheat you out of money because they needed so much money that they couldn't cheat everybody. So they had to keep themselves honest. And it was that kind of approach that allowed us to trust them with our money. We do know now that that process is imprecise, and there were instances where the customer experience was very poor, and also the lack of transparency allowed companies to go down the logical route of constantly looking for savings, which at some point ended up creating bad practices, which we don't agree with. It created bad customer experiences, bad customer service, and even, in some cases, a loss in the quality of the product which we liked. Which brings us now to where we are today. You have that kind of transparency, you have the kind of connection, and suddenly the scaling process doesn't work in terms of facelessness. In order for you to scale, you need to do more with less. You need to be able to have more people rooting for you than you have on your payroll. The only way you can do that is by actually connecting with the people you want to connect with and do business with. You want essentially their passion. You want them as evangelists of your products. You want them to do the job for you. For them to do that, to act as an unpaid sales force in effect, you need to be absolutely spot on. You need to be able to fulfill the requirements beyond the transactional nature of your business. Because anybody can do that. You have many competitors. Nobody's in a unique business. So really, you need to connect with them in a way that says, hey, Lisa does this and she does it in such a great way. I really buy into it. I think she's fantastic. I'm going to tell my friends about it. So suddenly you have an unpaid sales force working for you in that kind of environment, which makes that kind of connection capable of scaling. And when it comes to talking about, for instance, Hangouts on air, you see a lot of things which in digital communication you wouldn't see. You see body language, and we know that 65% of communication happens with non-verbal cues. So you're actually able to establish, what does a person do? Who are they? Are they hiding behind their label? Are they a true expert? For instance, I mean, if we take this into example, I have Nike with me, bombing my Hangout, and I could call myself a global expert. I could say whatever, but at the end of the day, I'm just a person doing a job. And once you actually understand that, then you focus past the label, past the description, which basically means nothing, and you focus on the content. You focus on what we're talking about. You focus on whether they make sense. You focus on whether it's practical. Is it backed up by some kind of expertise and real understanding, or am I just hiding behind a label, making a lot of noise and expecting you to believe me because the label is there? We are past that stage. So Hangouts on there are very disruptive in that effect. You can very quickly ascertain, yeah, this is good. I'm going to listen to it. Therefore, I'm going to trust that person. I'm going to give them my attention. Or, hey, this is rubbish and a waste of time, and I've got way too many important things to do. Then listen to this.
Yeah.
And this is the disruptive factor for companies who are used to basically using their labels, which have huge value in terms of equity and how much they spend establishing them, as their de facto trust factor. They needed you to listen to them because they're Reebok or Nike or Adidas. And now you're saying, well, I don't care about that. Tell me why I should actually listen to you. And they have to rework these things now.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. And creating an identity for ourselves online is much different now, as like everything that you've explained, than it was before. And using Hangouts to create an identity for yourself and your business and your brand is also very different, because, as you say, so what? Someone from Nike can get on a Hangout, but but if they're still in that old mindset of just looking at you like a unit, then people are going to shut off the Hangout, or they're not going to watch the video, or they're not going to engage in
Exactly.
a way. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that piece of Hangouts that brings your identity and create an identity for ourselves using Hangouts, and how that works.
Well, absolutely. And essentially, the elements of our identity are established by many things. Established by a belief system, by our understanding of who we are and what we do, by our understanding of our audience and what is important to them, and also by the importance of the value that we bring to the conversation. And we must really understand that it's a real conversation. No one can be an authority or an expert on any kind of subject matter to the extent that there's no conversation whatsoever. There always has to be something, because it's impossible for you to actually know these things. Now, all that, these are all blending areas which create essentially your authority within inverted commas on who you are and what you do on the web. And the way you establish this is through consistency, through real value, through demonstration of expertise, through a willingness to engage in conversation and actually get involved in the nitty-gritty. You listen to the details. And again, Hangouts on air, beyond the one-to-one factor which we have now, they happen on an event page. People go to the event page, they post questions there. It's important to go back to that and actually listen to this, listen to the questions. Provide some answer if you can. If you can't, again, explore why you can't or why it's not possible to give an answer to this. And this two-way kind of communication is, it's a kind of thing which we are very good at in the offline world on one-to-one. We've never been very good at this in marketing. This is really new ground, because essentially it challenges who we are as authority figures, and as authority figures, we're still bound by the model of the past where, I know everything. So, which is not, it cannot logically be true in any kind of environment. So this willingness to admit that we don't is also an admission of vulnerability, which doesn't sit very carefully in any kind of MBA-orientated brand marketing lesson, where they say, you have to basically establish who you are and claim that space. So that's the humaneness of it. This is how you actually create a conversation in a modern space where you're willing to actually participate in a full two-way kind of conversation and show that kind of vulnerability, which allows us to make the connection at the end of the day.
I feel like, for me, one of the wonderful things that Hangout has done in the year and a half that I've been using them and been participating both as a host and as a guest and just as an audience member in them, is this ability for us to go from the me space to the we space, which I'm sure you talk about it all the time. It's like, okay, if we're really going to make change in the world, and if we're going to do our good in the world, in whatever business that we're in, it requires perspective. Like as you're saying, you can't possibly know everything that there is to know. And when we gain perspective by having conversations with others and hear their questions and take them into consideration and go, okay, yeah, that's a good way to look at it. I never thought of that. It's these conversations that have nothing to do with trying to sell our products or services, but just taking it, transcending business to the next level of being in service to, as I say, the awakening of human and social potential. Because I believe that business, yes, we have to make a bottom line, we have to make money, but I think that there's also this emergence of businesses who have a bottom line, or are working towards having a bottom line that has a bigger cause related to it. And that's one of the most amazing things that Hangouts have done, is they're a technology that have allowed us to bring the we space into the right now moment, as I see it.
Absolutely, exactly. And really the we space is that alignment of values. Mm-hmm. We used to have any kind of transactional relationship in the past, used to be a push-pull affair. We were going to spend X amount of money, and we wanted the greatest value possible for that X amount of money. So basically, the other side, which is the person selling it, wanted the greatest amount of money from us for the least amount of effort. And we sort of tagged back and forth, trying to see who's going to gain this kind of relationship. And it's not like that anymore, because essentially, if we're going to spend money buying something, we have a problem which we want to solve. That problem could be something which we're facing really right now. You need a bar of soap because we all need to be clean. Or you're making a lifestyle choice. You're going on a holiday which reflects who you are, who you think you are, who you're becoming in your life's journey. Whichever one it is, you want the person you're dealing with, you want to feel that they're on the same side as you. They really want not the most amount of money from you, because obviously they want money because everything costs and they need to make a living. There's no question about that. But you don't want to feel that they're pushing you to get the most amount of money from you in that transaction. What you want to feel is they're actually trying to make you gain the most value for your money. In order to do that, they have to act as your friend. They have to really understand what you're doing and say, hey, if you spend $5,000 in this experience holiday, this is what you get. But this isn't much different from 4,500. With the extra 500, you can have extra meals, for instance.
Yeah.
So this is up to you. But having that kind of ability to explain things in a way that allows us to feel in control, then goes a lot towards actually establishing trust with any kind of entity involved in a transactional process.
Yeah. Absolutely. So then that brings me to the last thing I want to bring in, because I know we're sort of getting in. People are asking questions. Guys, my comment tracker isn't working. We'll get to some of your questions at the end. I just want to sort of stay in the flow of this conversation with David here, because you talk about trust, yes, and you also talk about a need for some moral a compass of moral behavior in the online space. And when we're talking about Hangouts, hello, we really need a moral compass for behavior. I think trust fits into that. Can you talk a little bit about that? You do talk about it in the book, but if you could touch on it a little bit.
Definitely. Well, if we think about trust itself is broken down into a four-step process. It goes through contact, which is anything which we do to establish a kind of contact. Then it goes to assessment. Then, it goes to perception, the perception of the contact and what the other person actually expects. Then it goes to assessment, and finally, if all those things are right, it leads to a connection. Now, if we think about that, that's the process through which we establish trust in anything, and trust is necessary for any kind of relational exchange to take place, whether it's listening to somebody's advice or actually sending money to somebody in the expectation that what you bought will actually arrive at your doorstep, 10 days from now, kind of thing. In order for any of this to happen, everybody has to more or less be guided by the same kind of global morality, if we like. We all want to sort of have the greatest good which has to happen in the universe. We always have to feel that what we're doing is beyond just creating money for ourselves. Otherwise, within the money making concept, there's absolutely nothing wrong with me setting up a company which is fake, selling empty air, getting the money, closing it down, and then setting up another one. But we know that approach, taken to the extreme, can be done by all of us. And at the end of the day, we're going to lose trust, we're going to lose connectivity, we're going to lose the social concept, which holds everything together. And very much, in a very short frame of time, we're going to end up in an Exxon world where the planet has been burnt to a crisp and we have nothing to live for. So the moment we actually realize this is not what we want, we all begin to work a little bit towards that kind of concept. And that's where the connection, the alignment has to happen. Because ultimately, anybody who's working, whether it's in a business environment or a non-business environment, wants to have that kind of concept and alignment with the people they actually connect with. How we create this is through communication, essentially. If we are not able to establish ourselves in a way that our values come forward, that our common sense of a shared journey comes into place, then arguably our identity is not worked out sufficiently, our way of working is not there, and although we may be using the tools of business because they're easy to acquire, they're the hard edge. Everybody can have a website, everybody can have a mail list, everybody can have automated selling software and follow-ups and everything, because these are things which you buy in. But the tools themselves don't actually create the entity. The value, the sense of connection, the sense of humaneness comes from the soft side, the soft things you actually bring into the business. They're your sense of trust, your sense of value, your sense of goodness, if you like, the ability to actually be open and vulnerable and listen, and even the willingness sometimes to lose out on transactions where you're clearly at fault. And you think, well, okay, I've learned from that. So let's move on from there and actually create a good experience for everybody else from now on and for ourselves at this point in time.
Yeah, you bring something up that's come up in all three of the previous shows, which is it's not about the tool itself, it's about how we as humans use the tool, and that it all comes down to this whole everything that we're talking about the connectivity, the trust, the engagement, the empathy. All of it requires us as an individual, as an individual person, to have some level of done some level of interpersonal, have those skills, the interpersonal skills, have done maybe a little bit of work, so that personal work, so that you're not taking everything personally, because you're going to get comments from people, for instance, and if you're taking everything personally, then that's going to affect things. You need to know how to listen. I've been on a lot of Hangouts where it's just one person fire hosing, and you're like, okay, have you heard anything anyone else has said? Are we relating here, or is this just all about your agenda? So there is a level, I believe, of personal work required when we're in a space that's so transparent and in the moment right now. Otherwise, it becomes so apparent that, okay, that person has a chip on their shoulder, or whoo, that person doesn't have any boundaries, or you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I think I'll usually bring up an example in this kind of, in a lot of my the talks I give, to actually sort of frame what I'm talking about. And let's think of one of the most individualistic activities we can have, which is driving. You're in your car, in your own space, enclosed in a vehicle. You're not in connection with anybody else around you. You're on the road, and you just want to get from A to B as quickly as possible. Now, if we take that into a very logical conclusion, you need to go as fast as you can, jump every red light, let nobody out from any kind of roads coming in or out, and just cut in front of everyone and get as fast as you can, because it's important to you. But we don't do that. And the reason we don't do that is because ultimately, subconsciously, we take everybody else around us into account. Because if we don't, we're going to have an accident or cause accidents. Lives are going to be lost. And if everybody does the same thing, we're all going to die. Going on the road is going to become an incredibly risky proposition. So really, subconsciously, we act like very social beings in the most individualistic moment. We actually let people in front of us. We don't cut in front of people. We don't exceed the speed limit give or take 5 miles or so. And we don't jump red lights because we know that's a really dangerous thing to do. So if we can act in that environment without any really global rules to guide us, we can act in a subconscious way as very social animals. There's no reason why we can't do it on the web. Now, why we don't is because a lot of the times we lose track of the fact that there are other people around us, there are other people who have as much right as we do, but also they have a voice which we need to listen to and actually interact and engage with. Because there's no evident impact, when we look at a screen, we'll just look at pixels, we tend to lose focus of that fact. And that's where the disconnect actually occurs. But really, we have an impact on everybody, and the moment we do something, people see it, it has an impact on them. And you mentioned the word agenda, and you're actually quite right. We always have an agenda. In the physical world, we have a corporeal existence, and we arguably have no choice, we have to be there. None of us has to be on a digital domain. We're here by choice, which means whether we acknowledge that or not, whether you can say, well, I'm just wasting a little bit of time after work and I'm surfing. Well, actually, no, you're not. I mean, yes, you are, but there's an agenda at the back of your mind. You're trying to achieve something. There's an intention to your action, which means it's guided by things which maybe you haven't understood, but they're still there. How do we actually clear away all the debris and get to the value underneath? Is by being introspective. We really need to realize that when you're online, you're creating your own identity. You're creating in as nuanced a way, in as many layers as you do offline. The clothes we wear, the tone we use, where we live, how we get about, the cars we buy. These are all signals in the physical world. It means something. You don't have to buy a sports car. You can do with a smart car, but you tend to buy a sports car because you have a certain thing which you're actually projecting outwards. So it's a conscious decision. We get online and we tend to forget all these things because it's so easy and there's no actual physical impact, but there is one. And the moment we begin to understand that, that's when we really begin to own who we really are. That's when we actually begin to connect really as people, even though we're looking at just pixels on a screen.
Yeah, it's so trippy. So my aunt was telling me about this terminology called digital natives and digital immigrants, and I forget. There's a guy who talks, a leadership person, and I forget his name. So I'll if I remember it, I'll put it into the comments for you guys. But so anyway, she's telling me how anybody who is currently under the age of like 17, like my daughter is 12 and a half, they're considered digital natives, and their entire brain structure is wired differently around how they connect in this medium, which you talk about. We're no longer going to be saying online and offline, we're just going to be saying connecting. But then we have anybody over that age where the digital and social media and all of this stuff came into our lives after we had, I learned how to type on a regular typewriter, not even an electric typewriter. I was using a manual typewriter, like now I'm on my iPhone, like with my two thumbs. So she was talking or telling me about how there's this thing between digital natives and digital immigrants, and most of us who are over the age of 20 certainly are digital immigrants, and so we're sort of like retarded. Excuse my, that term, but we're just sort of fumbling around this, like figuring out how do you connect, and there's rules here, and but these digital immigrants or digital natives have a whole different thing. I think it will be interesting to see when they grow up and they get to be our age, if things change or not. I mean, maybe they won't, but I just thought that was an interesting...
It is, and actually you're quite right, because we see that in corporations, and to use the lingo of the industry, essentially it's a differentiation between operational and executional values. And as digital immigrants, we tend to still be wowed by our tools. We say, oh, look at this, I can send a message to 1 billion people. I can do this in a click, and 1 million people see it. We're still sort of fascinated by that, and we tend to focus on that. And businesses tend to do that. They tend to make the same mistake. They tend to think, these are our tools. They lower the cost of visibility and advertising and communicating with the masses, and that's what we're going to do because it lowers the cost. but that is the wrong kind of thing. If we look at the operational, which the digital natives are actually looking at, to them, with their tools agnostic, they don't really see the platforms. They don't see Facebook, Twitter, or G+, like we do. They don't look at whether they use WhatsApp or whether they use Instagram. To them, the intentional thing is what matters the most. They need to communicate, and they need to do it perhaps in a more public way, in a more private way, in a more safe way, in a less safe way. So they're very adept at translating their intent into action, as we are very good usually at taking what we've always done, digitizing it, creating a mass market, lowering the cost, and looking at the executional values. And that's where the two really need to come together. We need to bring the operational and the executional into one sphere.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and the other piece of that was she was telling me that there's a need for reverse mentoring, so that we are actually being mentored by these younger digital natives, because we have something to learn from them, and understanding that to them is inherently like, of course you would never do that. Like, that's like, oh,
definitely.
okay.
Again, you're making an incredibly important point. And the classic example here, the classic example of divide, is the preoccupation with privacy. And everybody over 20 is really worried about privacy. It's the government spying on us. Everything we do is visible. How do we try and protect our privacy? We have endless discussions about this. Anybody under 20, what do they do? Well, they're really adept at making things public or not making things public. If it's a public platform and they have no choice, they work out a code, which is personal within the group. And they actually manage to communicate with each other in a very open but still contextually hidden way. To them, it doesn't matter what it is what it is. They're actually going to do what they want with it because they can. And I think that's the main difference. It's this ability to actually function in a space like a native, where you don't worry about all the problems which you encounter simply because they're problems which you encounter, and you're going to find ways around them. To us who, privacy. And if we think about privacy in itself, we never really had it. In the offline world, if the government really wanted to come after you at any time in history, it could. And it could do nothing about it because it was the government. It had so many tools at its disposal, and you're one individual and you're helpless. We get into the online world, well, now the only difference is we can actually see what they do. And yes, it's despicable. Yes, you think, why the heck are they doing it on my time and on my dime? They shouldn't be using my money and the authority I have given them to spy on me in the name of my safety. That is a concept I totally get. It's valid, but at the end of the day, it's what it is, right? We can try and change it, certainly, but we shouldn't get hung up on it. We should find ways around it. And that's really the difference between natives and immigrants.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, oh my gosh. Okay, we've had a very full conversation here, and I just want to thank you so much, David, for coming on, sharing your wisdom, your insights. I'm always blown away sitting here listening. I took all these notes, like 3 pages of notes, and I'm going to go back and re-listen to the replay of this. Do you have any final parting words on authentic engagement, return on engagement, as it relates to specifically to Google Hangouts on Air to leave us with here?
Yes, definitely. I've got 2 things to say. One thing is we always had the ROI question when it comes to digital, to social media. We want to spend time online and then want to see money in the bank at the end of it. And it's never going to work because it's never worked like that in the offline world. What we've always had in the offline world was communication. You communicated with people, you created alliances, you established who you were, you built up your reputation, you traveled far and further ahead of you. And the real definition of reputation is the willingness of someone to do business with you if they have never experienced who you are. And that was the real value of that kind of reputation building. It's no different in the digital world. You're basically building reputation by acting in ways which allows that to be established and travel further afield, which then gives you greater market share if you're a company or a business. And the greater market share gives you what? Sales. So being focused on, hey, I put a message on Twitter or I put a message on social media, how many boxes did that move? Well, that's the wrong kind of thinking. It shouldn't be about moving boxes. It should be about basically connecting with people, winning hearts and minds. And the other thing about authenticity is really define who you are. Find out, really, do the hard thing. Think, who am I really? What is my intent as a person, as an individual, as a business, as an entity? What is it I want to do at the end of the day, at the end of the month, at the end of the year, 5 years from now? And once you understand clearly what drives you, then it becomes a lot easier to connect with the people that really matter to you in that respect.
Beautiful. So how can our audience members and anybody watching in replay, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you? Connect with you?
Well, you can find me on G+. I always try very hard to be very responsive there. And you can find me on my website, davidamerland.com.
Wonderful. And that's down on his lower third there, davidamerland.com. Well, once again, thank you so much, David, for being a part of this series. I feel really honored to have you in this series, and it's been wonderful getting to have this conversation with you.
Thank you very much.
And thanks to everybody for showing up live today. Sorry we didn't get to comments, but we will be going back through the comments and replying to them. Thank you so much again for being here, you guys, showing up live, taking the time out of your day to be here with us in this important conversation. And if you like what we talked about in these 4 shows in this series, I'm also going to be hosting another 4-part series at the end of this month where you will learn how to use Hangouts as part of your engagement strategy to connect, communicate, and cultivate your message to a global audience and make a meaningful impact across the planet. You can find out more about that by going to the bit.ly/Hangout Hero. And that's a wrap for this series, you guys. Again, thanks for joining us. I hope you understand a bit more about this return on engagement thing and how authentic conversations are really, really the key to building your brand and building your business. See you all next time. Bye.
Take care.